Today I'm going to be showing you how to service an A-Dec 3-in-1 syringe using the DCI service kit, which is part number 9347, and we'll go through what we've got here shortly. The first thing to mention is, before you start work on this, we're going to want to make sure there's no air or water to the syringe. So we can turn the toggle off on the chair and we can push these buttons, make sure we got no air or water left in the system, and then we can start work on the syringe. The great thing about an Adec syringe is that they unscrew from here, so you can disconnect it from the chair and go and work on it on the counter. Now, I did mention that you can turn the pressure off to the chair and check there's no air or water left in the syringe. If your syringe has one of these, as soon as you disconnect the syringe, it will automatically turn the air and water off to that syringe head. But it's always still good practice to turn the chair off if you're unsure. So we can get rid of these two, because essentially this is what you'll be left with, and this is what we're going to be servicing. So what I've got here is the DCI service tool. The part number for this is 9286. Q-tip. This is a button removal tool if you can't get the buttons out easily. Part number for that is 8059, and this is a Adec syringe tip. So we'll go ahead and open the kit, see what we have inside, and we'll get started. Right, so what we've got here, 2 buttons, air and water, 2 conical springs to go under the buttons. This is the tip adapter O-rings. This is the air and water O-ring, and we have a button screw which holds the buttons in place. First thing I like to do is do the tip adapter. That's my preference. So using the Adec tool, we can pop this into the tip adapter and remove it. And you'll see that this is actually in 2 parts. So this here is the tip adapter itself, and this is the spacer. Now there's an O-ring in the spacer, so we can start by changing that, and that is replaced by this small one here. Get rid of that. So now we're left with that, the spacer. And at any point, if any of this looks dirty, we can give it a clean. And take the new O-ring and place it into the spacer. So that's the new O-ring nicely in the spacer. Now you'll notice the DCI kit, the O-rings are brown. That means they're made from Viton, which is an autoclavable material. And in this tip adapter, there are 2 O-rings in here. I like to avoid using sharp tools, but sometimes needs must. There's our first one. There's our second one. So then we can take our new O-rings, that's these 2 larger ones here, and position the first one. Now definitely don't use a sharp tool to position this. What you can do is use the syringe tip itself. I'm just going to push these down into the adapter until they sit nice and flat at the bottom. So that's the first one in. And there's the second one, so just make sure they sit nice and flat against each other. And that is this part of the service done. You can pre-lubricate those O-rings, but I like to do it a different way, so I'll show you that shortly. So we can pop that spacer back into the adapter, screw that back into the syringe head, and we can just tighten that with our tool, not too tight. So moving on to the next part, we can now look at servicing the buttons, and as you'll see on this one, the water button is actually stuck all the way in. So the first thing you will do is we'll use this end of the tool, and also if you don't have this tool, you'll need an imperial hex key set, which includes this size and this size. But with the tool, it's very easy, all in one. And we can go ahead and start to unscrew that central screw. And you'll notice it starts to pull the buttons up with it anyway. And you'll get to a point where it won't spin anymore because it is threaded all the way out. So now you can give those buttons a bit of a pull. And obviously this one hasn't been serviced in a long time, so they're quite stiff. This is where you can use that tool I mentioned, 8059, and just sort of give it a hand. Pop that spring out, that screw out. That's that out the way. And now these button assemblies should pull out, and look at the state of that. And this one. So that's the old buttons out, and you'll notice there are two conical springs sat underneath, so we can go ahead and, if they don't drop out, you can go ahead, use the tool again and remove them that way. And we are left with that. Now this is where we can use our Q-tips and give it a bit of a clean if they're dirty. That's that one. Do this one. Give that little button screw a clean. At this part is where we might need a little bit of silicone grease. So what I like to do is just get a little bit of that on the back of my glove. Not much at all. And then I will literally dab the tiniest bit of that and rub it between thumb and finger, and then take the buttons and just gently roll that between your fingers. Do that for both buttons. Small end at the top, big end at the bottom. You can drop that one in there, and you can help it along the way with the tool. And just make sure it's seated nicely. Same with the other one. You want to be nice and flat. And now with our lubricated button, we can pop that in on top of that spring, pop that one in on top of that spring, and we can push them both down together. The next part, we have the screw that we need to get in the middle of those buttons. So what we'll need to do is pull the buttons back up ever so slightly, back up to about this position. We'll do that with both of those, and that should allow us to manipulate this screw between them. You can put it on, pre-position it on the tool just to sort of line it up under the buttons, and when you get to this point, just give it that first little turn, and now we can push the buttons down together so we know they're going to seat correctly. Start to do that screw, and as we're doing it, just keep checking the buttons and screw that down to the shoulder. That's the buttons complete. That's the service done. So now we can reconnect the syringe and test it. One final thing to note, the Adec syringe tip has, you'll notice, has these 2 grooves here. If we compare that to an ordinary syringe tip, and line those up, you'll notice the ordinary syringe tip has the first groove, but it doesn't have the second groove. Now when you position that next to that tip adapter, these grooves line up with the O-rings and lock the tip in place, which obviously will not happen if you're using this syringe tip. Obviously we haven't greased those tip adapter O-rings yet, so what I like to do is get a bit more of our silicone grease, grease the end lightly like that, and we can pop this in until we get those nice 2 clicks. That's the 2 clicks you want to hear, and you want to make sure that this groove lines up with the end of this tip adapter. When we push that in, that lets us know that it's aligned correctly. And by doing the grease on the tip, it only greases the inside of the O-rings where we actually need it. We don't need to grease the whole O-ring. We can now put that back on the chair and get it tested. But that is the service of a Adec syringe using the DCI kit, part number 9347.